Please, it's raining hard out here. I need help. Somebody open up.
This is just the beginning.
The heavy oak door of the St. James home didn't just shut. It severed the world. The final metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded like an executioner's axe hitting the block. Evangeline stood frozen on the rain-slicked porch, the torrential downpour immediately soaking through the vintage yellow jasmine floral dress she had chosen as her armor. Water tracked down her rich mahogany skin, washing away the light dusting of face powder, but it couldn't clean the stain of her father's final words from her mind. She pressed her back against the unforgiving wood of the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for a mother's instinct to override a preacher's wrath. Inside, there was only the cold, unyielding silence of a house that had decided she was dead. "Marcus is gone," she whispered to the storm, the name tasting like cold ash before she corrected herself. "Evangeline is what's left." She stepped off the porch, her cheap, thrifted heels instantly sinking into the thick black mud of the unpaved 9th Ward street. A few yards away, her small canvas bag lay capsized in a ditch, its cheap zipper split open. Her few belongings, the fragments of silk scarves she had managed to save, were already drowning in the rising water. She didn't look back at the dark windows where the lace curtains remained motionlessly closed. With her chin held high and her arms wrapped tightly around her shivering frame, she began her slow, painful march toward the distant, hazy neon glow of downtown New Orleans. By the time the city lights enveloped her, the rain had slowed to a heavy, humid mist that hung over the French Quarter like a wet wool blanket. The streets smelled of diesel exhaust, stale beer, and the slow, sweet rot of the Mississippi River. Evangeline walked past the shuttered storefronts, a lone, striking figure in a ruined floral dress. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her. Every passing vehicle felt like a rolling cage of potential violence. Her feet were blistered and bleeding, the high heels discarded miles back in the mud. She was an island of deep mahogany skin navigating a concrete sea that viewed her very existence as a structural error. The downtown Greyhound terminal was a brutalist cavern of concrete and stained linoleum. It smelled aggressively of ammonia, industrial floor wax, and the accumulated despair of travelers with nowhere left to go. Evangeline slipped through the heavy glass doors, her wet feet leaving dark, rhythmic prints on the grimy floorboards. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed with a relentless frequency that vibrated in her teeth. She found a plastic bench in the furthest corner, tucked deep into the shadows beneath a broken arrivals monitor. She pulled her knees tightly to her chest, trying to hide her face behind her long, slender fingers. For 3 days and 3 nights, the terminal became her fortress and her prison. Evangeline did not sleep. She watched. She watched the drunks stumble past her bench, their eyes glassy and unpredictable. She watched the ticket clerks look through her as if she were a pane of dirty glass. Most of all, she watched the men with sharp, predatory eyes who prowled the rows of seats, the men who lingered near her corner, whispering low, suggestive invitations that made her blood turn to ice. She clutched the torn, waterlogged fragment of her emerald green silk scarf in her pocket, using its smooth texture as an anchor to keep from screaming. By the 3rd night, hunger had mutated from a dull ache into a sharp, structural weakness inside her chest. Her stomach twisted violently, her vision blurring under the harsh glare of the neon terminal signs. She watched a family at the opposite bench share a box of fried chicken, the rich, greasy aroma torturing her senses. She had no capital, no family name left to leverage, and no place in the rigid architecture of the city. The phantom weight of her father's leather belt still burned across her shoulders, a reminder that under his roof, identity was paid for in blood. The rhythmic, sharp click of high heels against the grimy terrazzo floor cut through the white noise of the terminal. Evangeline didn't raise her head until a shadow fell across her bench, smelling cleanly of expensive hairspray, loose face powder, and structural confidence. Standing before her was a towering black woman who seemed to radiate a vibrant energy that defied the terminal's gloom. She wore a bold, canary yellow sheath dress that clung to her curves, her makeup a flawless work of art that softened the sharp lines of her jawline. Her hair was a lacquered updo that caught the neon light. "Honey," the woman said, her voice a warm, brassy rasp that carried the weight of absolute survival. "If you keep trying to swallow yourself whole, you're gonna choke." Evangeline looked up, her deep-set dark eyes wide with a mixture of hypervigilance and sheer exhaustion. The woman didn't offer pity. Pity was a currency that bought nothing on these streets. Instead, she opened a silver case, pulled out a cigarette, and held it out alongside a gold lighter. "The name is Trixie Fontaine," the woman said, her eyes searching Evangeline's face with deep comprehension. "And you look like you've been running from a fire that's still burning in your clothes." Evangeline hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached out to accept the offering. The small flame illuminated the space between them, a golden bridge over a void of rejection. Trixie's home on Rampart Street was a classic New Orleans shotgun house, narrow and deep, smelling of boiling red beans, sweet shea butter, and burning sage. It was a chaotic archive of identity. Racks of sequined gowns lined the hallway, and feathered boas hung from the light fixtures like tropical moss. "It isn't the Garden District," Trixie said, tossing her keys onto a velvet sofa. "But the locks work, and nobody's gonna hit you for trying to look beautiful under my roof." Evangeline sat on the edge of a plush armchair, her body finally relaxing as the warmth of the space began to melt the ice in her bones. For the first time in her life, she had stepped into a room that didn't demand she shrink to fit its blueprint. The next morning, the lessons began. Evangeline stood in front of a massive vanity mirror framed by bright theatrical bulbs. The table was a sea of cold cream jars, loose powders, and lipsticks. Trixie stood behind her, her hands resting firmly on Evangeline's mahogany shoulders. "Your father tried to beat right angles into your face, child," Trixie murmured, picking up a makeup sponge. "But you are a storm of organic curves. We use the dark shades here, beneath the cheekbones, to create the shadow. We control what they see. Makeup isn't a lie, honey. It's the infrastructure of your truth." With meticulous precision, Trixie guided Evangeline's long, slender fingers as she applied the foundation. Evangeline watched her reflection transform. The harsh, defensive lines of her jawline began to soften under the warm tones of the cream. The bruises from Silas's belt were hidden beneath layers of concealer, buried like the secrets of the Ninth Ward. "You have a queen's bone structure, Eva," Trixie said, leaning down to view her work in the glass. "Never let a man convince you that your canvas is flawed. You hold the brush now." From the bottom of a closet, Trixie pulled a pair of 3-inch patent leather heels, their black surfaces gleaming under the bedroom light. They looked like instruments of torture to Evangeline's swollen, blistered feet. "Put them on," Trixie commanded with a playful wink. "A woman doesn't walk through this city, she negotiates it. These will give you the altitude you need to look down on the people who want you buried." Evangeline stepped into the shoes, her balance immediately faltering. Her long legs shook as she tried to stand straight, her posture rigid with fear. "Grounded, child. Move from the hips, not the knees," Trixie shouted, pacing the length of the hardwood corridor. For hours, Evangeline marched up and down the shotgun house, her movements slowly shifting from a clumsy, mechanical shuffle into a fluid, rhythmic stride. She practiced keeping her shoulders back and her chin parallel to the floorboards. When she finally stepped onto the buckled brick paths of the Rampart Street sidewalk, the heels clicked with a sharp, clear authority that sounded like a challenge to the world outside. Weeks turned into months. On a humid midnight, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, Evangeline and Trixie sat on the front porch steps. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows slowly cruised past the house for the third time, its engine a low, predatory rumble. "Track him, Eva," Trixie whispered, her eyes never leaving the vehicle's taillights. "Look at the license plate. That's a city councilman's car. He'll cruise this block for another hour, looking for a piece of the soul he condemns from his podium on Monday morning." Evangeline watched the black car disappear into the dark. "Why do they come here if they hate us?" "They don't hate us, honey. They hate themselves for wanting us," Trixie said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "I call them the wolves. They will love you in the dark, buy you silk dresses, and whisper that you're their secret queen. But if you wave to them on Bourbon Street in the daylight, they will call the vice squad or pull a knife just to bury the evidence of their desire. Use their gold to build your fortress, but keep your heart under lock and key." The night of her debut at the Velvet Room arrived like a fever dream. Backstage, the air was a thick cloud of hairspray, loose powder, and raw nerves. Evangeline stood in front of the wardrobe rack, her hand running over a spectacular gown made of emerald green silk that Trixie had hawked her own jewelry to buy. The fabric felt cool against her mahogany skin, a living resurrection of the scarf Silas had torn to pieces in her childhood bedroom. As the dress zipped shut with a sharp metallic slide, she felt the final transformation lock into place. She wasn't a victim of the Ninth Ward anymore. She was an empire in the making. "You look like a goddess, child," Trixie said, her warm rasp full of emotion as she adjusted a heavy strand of faux pearls around Evangeline's neck. Around them, the other performers were laughing, adjusting their corsets, and painting their lips in vibrant shades of crimson. It was a community built out of the wreckage of rejection, a house of sisters who had learned how to turn their scars into art. Evangeline took a deep breath, her deep-set dark eyes reflecting the bright dressing room lights with a fierce, absolute clarity. Through the thin walls of the dressing room, the opening notes of the house jazz band began to filter in. The saxophone groaned with a slow, sultry contralto rhythm that sounded like a wet New Orleans street translated into music. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic structural beat that threatened to break through her poise. She remembered her father's hymns, the sterile right angles of his church, and the silent turning away of her mother. She was about to step onto a stage where her voice would either set her free or destroy her sanctuary. "Time's up, Eva. Show them the queen," Trixie whispered, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain that separated the wings from the stage. Evangeline stepped forward, her 3-inch heels clicking flawlessly against the wooden stage planks. The blinding white glare of the spotlight hit her full face, casting the packed, smoky basement audience into a sea of anonymous silhouettes. The room fell completely silent, the sheer physical presence of this 6-foot-tall mahogany woman in emerald silk taking the oxygen out of the air. She reached out, her long, slender fingers gripping the silver microphone stand with an unyielding strength. She looked into the dark, ignoring the wolves lurking in the corner booths, ignoring the memory of the locked oak door in the 9th Ward. She opened her lips, painted in a deep, defiant crimson, and let her voice fly. The first note, a rich, slow contralto full of iron, silk, and rain, vibrated through the floorboards, announcing to the city that Evangeline St. James had finally arrived.